My background is outside the rail industry. I had not been involved with it before I eventually came in as the chairman of Network Rail. But what I saw was a deterioration in public perception and confidence in the rail industry from about 1999. There'd been the initial enthusiasm following privatisation, but in 1999 there was a major accident at Ladbroke Grove where 31 people were killed in a head-on collision, and the company came in for a lot of public criticism. It dominated the headlines in the news for a number of weeks. And things then slowly started to get back onto an even keel, and then we had the problems of Hatfield. And Hatfield, another number of people were killed when a train derailed as a result of a broken rail. The problem that Railtrack had at that time was that it didn't know exactly what its asset condition was, and didn't really know the fundamental cause of the accident in Hatfield, other than a rail had broken. So in order to deal with the safety issues coming from that, the company imposed blanket speed restrictions across the network. The effect of that was a rapid and significant deterioration in train punctuality. People couldn't get to work, and there was rising public anger, rising public frustration that the company could not deal with that issue. The net effect was its revenues deteriorated, it needed to spend money to repair the track, money it did not have, and the net effect of that was that in October 2001 it went into administration.
In the months following the administration of Railtrack, there was a lot of discussion with government about the form that its successor should take. At this stage, government was very interested in the idea of public interest companies, companies that were independent of government in the private sector, but with a mandate to provide a public service for the benefit of passengers. The eventual form of this venture was a company limited by guarantee. Limited by guarantee because there are no shareholders, there's no private capital in the structure of the company, but its dividends are reinvested for the benefit of stakeholders as a whole, and it is accountable to those stakeholders for the delivery of good performance on the railway.
It was at the end of 2001 that I was approached by the Department of Transport and asked whether I would take on the role of being chair of this public interest bidding group that the government was setting up to take Railtrack out of administration. Remember, the government's objective was to have a private enterprise organisation take Railtrack out of administration, but they couldn't take the risk that that might not happen. So they wanted a public interest bidding group, if you like, as a standby, fail-safe mechanism in the event that no private enterprise organisation was willing to take the risk. So I was asked whether I would take on the chairmanship of this, and I said I would. I went along for the interviews at the Department of Transport, as you do under the Nolan rules. And I recall that one of the questions they asked was what I thought was whether or not I thought I had any particular weaknesses. And I said yes, I did. That whilst I had very widespread business experience, I didn't have direct experience of treasury operations or banking operations.
I was appointed the deputy chairman of Network Rail in December 2001. I had a background originally in the city. I was a lawyer and then I was a project banker. And then in 1997 I had worked inside the Treasury for 3 years trying to get a grip on the private finance initiative. And I got to know the Department for Transport very well in that time. So in some ways it was a natural step for me to join Ian McAllister and Ian Coucher as the three people responsible for bringing Network Rail to fruition. I think all in all we made a pretty good team.
Well, in December 2001 I was then Chief Executive of Tube Lines. That was one of the companies bidding for government work on the tube privatisation exercise. As part of that I came into contact with many of the officials at the Department of Environment, Transport and Regions. And in mid-December, one of the officials picked up the phone to me and said, would I be interested in running or creating a new company to take Railtrack out of administration? I thought about that, thought about my skill set and thought, absolutely, this is something that I really wanted to do and felt I could make a real difference. My background is in transformation, change, acquisition, setting up new companies, turning around companies, and this was precisely what I thought I could bring to this particular consortium. Some of the challenges we faced during the acquisition strategy is about the information that we didn't really know. We had no access to the information about the assets, where they were, what condition they were in, how much money was being spent on them. We were unable to talk to the existing management team because of the process of the sell-off. And then there was the unknown issue about the West Coast route modernisation, a multi-billion-pound project which had got into horrible difficulties. So the acquisition strategy we put in place, was much driven by what we did know as what we didn't know. So it's split into 3 phases. Phase 1, preparing all the information that we needed to try and find out during the due diligence phase. Second phase was that due diligence phase, going and finding information, validating it, corroborating it. And the third phase was developing detailed plans about what we should do and how we should do it immediately after the takeover.
As a bidding team, we were working very, very hard to produce an action plan that we could implement very, very quickly indeed. Government were under a lot of pressure because there was all the political pressure to do something to fix the problem of Railtrack. It was in administration. Administration was costing an awful lot of money, and performance wasn't improving significantly. So the issue was get in there quickly and fix it. So we spent a lot of time putting together a whole series of action plans that we could implement from day one, so that when we walked through the doors at Melton Street, we would hit the decks running.
The CLG team was faced with a huge financial challenge. We had to put together an offer for Railtrack in less than 3 months. You must remember that this was a competitive climate because there was at least one other bidder, potential bidder for Railtrack. So we had to get our skates on and try to find the quickest way of putting a financial package together. What this eventually meant was that we came up with the notion of bridge financing in order to try to do a transaction in 3 months that might normally have taken 10 or 12 months. And we worked very closely with government during this period. We knew we needed government support, but government clearly wanted that support to be at the lowest possible level and for the shortest possible time. We also needed to talk to the regulator. Regulator and Railtrack did not have good relationships. We thought we needed to change that. We needed to make not exactly an ally of the regulator, but we needed him to understand the different dynamics that the CLG would represent, the fresh start for the railways. And eventually we brought this package together in time to make an offer to the Railtrack board in late March.
We needed about £9 billion to buy the company, including the debt and paying the shareholders some £500 million for the assets, as well as buying the obligations relating to the Channel Tunnel Rail Link, which is a further £80 million. Second part was how much money we would need to run the company for the successive 2 or 3 years, and that was a further £6 billion. And that £6 billion wasn't just cash, it was in the form of government support to enable us to borrow the money to finance the activities.
The culmination of all this work on the financial package came at the end of March, when we had, I think, a quite tense meeting with the Railtrack board. We put to them an offer of about £2.50 a share, £500 million in all, to acquire the shareholders' interests in Railtrack. Eventually they accepted that offer. The government had provided £300 million to finance that because they too had an interest in getting Railtrack out of administration as soon as possible. Then it was necessary to look at the financing for Railtrack as a whole. We had spent a lot of time talking to banks. We had asked the banks to provide us an open bridge without any secure takeout. Quite a bold thing to do at that stage. The banks came to the party. We have found that by the end of June we were able to make a full offer for the whole Railtrack group, including all permanent financing. And then about the end of July, the Railtrack board accepted that offer as well. So we were able to move towards completion.
Once we acquired Railtrack, we would then become operator of the network licence, and that gave us huge responsibilities to providing train services and operational infrastructure to train companies who then provide them on to passengers and to freight users. But we also had a wider responsibility to plan the timetable, to look after the long-term interest of the railway, as well as maintaining it and renewing it and enhancing the network. During the few months leading up to the acquisition in October 2002, we developed a list of things which we thought we could develop or implement which have a material impact on the performance of the company. We homed in on around 32 significant actions that we would take in the first 18 months and then worked on detailed plans for implementation, including timescales, costs and responsibilities.
Well, the bidding group was formally constituted as a company in March of 2002, and we adopted the name Network Rail. One of the big criticisms of Railtrack was that there were not enough non-executives on the board who understood engineering issues. So we wanted to ensure that on the board of Network Rail we had a non-executive team that reflected broad business experience, but also people with specific experience in rail industry.
Well, on the first day that the Network Rail team arrived at Railtrack House, I do remember a very big meeting in the boardroom. It was a difficult meeting because the new team had to find a basis on which they could explain their plans to the Railtrack staff. The Railtrack staff had had a terrible battering during administration. They'd been in the press every day. The whole organisation had been traumatised by administration, and therefore the challenge for the new team was to explain the vision, to explain that there would be changes, but then to find a basis on which they could inspire people to move forward to restore the railways to a really proud operating achievement.
I don't think I will ever forget the first day that we moved into the headquarters of Railtrack. We'd spent some months devising a strategy, a detailed action plan that we were going to implement. And then comes the realization that there are only 7 of us that walk through the door. We put our reputations on the line as business people that we were going to turn around this organization, which at the time consisted of 15,000 people. And I always recall, after presenting our action plan to the senior executives in the boardroom, looking round, looking into their eyes and thinking, are you with us? Are you going to do what we want? Because if they weren't going to do what we want, we would all fail.